the screen is being recorded, but we'll see. Alright, so last time we were talking about RPCs and RMIs. We finished through the discussion. We did lightweight RPCs. We looked at various different semantics for RPCs. I talked about remote methods and distributed objects and using RMIs to do various RPC-like operations. Okay, so let's continue our discussion from that point on. So today we are going to basically talk a little bit more about distributed systems and communication. I'll talk more about semantics of communication, whether communication is transient or persistent, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, and see what those combinations give us. Okay? RPCs, RMIs, socket communication, all of the stuff that we have talked about actually falls in one quadrant of the various possibilities. There are three other semantics for implementing communication between systems, and we'll talk about that. And then I'm going to talk about stream-oriented communication towards the end of the class. Okay, so let's start with persistence and synchronicity. Okay, so this is a picture that you should keep in mind. Okay, so we'll assume that there are two endpoints that need to communicate in our distributed system. There is a sender and there is a receiver. There is an application at the sender that wants to communicate with the application at the receiver. Whether these are P2P applications or client-server applications is not material. Okay, and we'll assume that when messages are sent from the sender to the receiver, there are going to be multiple intermediaries. Okay, whether they are routers or application level relays is not important, but there are nodes in the network that are responsible for taking a message that goes out and keeps sending it one hop at a time until it gets to the receiver. Okay, there is some number, arbitrary number of intermediaries. Okay, keep that in mind. Okay. Also keep in mind that there are operating system kernels that are going to implement some protocols for us, whether they're TCP, IP or other protocols. Okay, and we'll talk about these queues as well as to what they do. Okay, with that picture in mind, let's first talk about the first dimension of communication, whether communication is persistent or transient. Okay, so let's try to understand what this means first. Okay, persistent communication essentially says that the network is capable of storing messages until the next entity in the route between the sender and the receiver is ready to receive the message. Okay, so there is capability to store messages in the network or at the endpoint for an arbitrary period of time. Okay. Transient communication, on the other hand, basically says that the network is not capable of storing messages. If the next hop is not ready to receive the message, you will discard it immediately. So what are examples of persistent communication? The most common one is email. Okay, when you receive an email message, okay, it is not required that you are logged into the system actively waiting to receive that message. The system will queue it up for you, will store it in your inbox, for instance. Okay? Same is true of email routers or email relays. Okay, the email message, once it's sent from the sender, is actually going to go through a sequence of mail servers. Okay? If the next mail server is not active for any reason, if it's down or it's not working, then the message is going to be queued and the system will keep trying to deliver that message. Okay? So neither the receiver or the next entity in the route does not need to be ready. Okay? The message will be stored. Okay, a more sort of antiquated example is the way mail was delivered in the old days through the Pony Express. Okay? So essentially, what post offices did is they took mail, they took it from one post office to another using Pony essentially, and then that you stored it there until the Pony that needed to take it to the next hop actually arrived and took the message. Yeah, so the messages were actually stored at the post offices, which were basically the holding entities, and the delivery was through this Pony Express. Okay, even today, this kind of technique is used. For instance, if you look at the way courier services, delivery services like UPS or FedEx actually do ground delivery. If you actually put a tracking number and see how your package has actually been routed, you will see that it will be put on a truck, the truck will take it to the next warehouse and the route, and then it will be stored there and resorted and put on another truck and so on. So these warehouses are essentially doing the same providing the same function as these post offices. Okay, and ponies have been replaced with trucks, but that's essentially how even today the system works. Yeah, that's persistent communication. We'll come back to this. This is still just looking at definitions and examples. Okay. See, the other extreme is transient communication. In transient communication, the message is stored only so long as the next, either the receiver or the next hop is ready or is available. Okay. If for some reason the machine is not running or the application is not running, message is immediately discarded. Okay. What are examples of this? Typical network routers. Okay. Routers will have only transient buffers, not persistent buffer, so the message is delivered to the next hop and is not available, it's immediately discarded. Okay. Transport level communication is the same thing. Okay, if when you set up a TCP connection, if the process crashes for any reason, okay, all the connection is torn down and any undelivered messages are discarded. The system is not going to store it, waiting for the process to come up. The connection is essentially broken. Okay. So that's transient communication. So no message no storage of messages, or messages are not persistent. That's one dimension, whether it's persistent or not. The other dimension is whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. Okay, so asynchronous communication basically says that the sender is not going to be blocking. Okay? Asynchronous basically means non-blocking. Synchronous means blocking. Okay? So you can just use these terms synonymously. So asynchronous communication essentially says that the sender is going to be doing non-blocking sets. It's going to send a message and continue. It's not going to wait until the message is received at the other end or received by the application or a reply is received, none of that. Okay? So sender continues immediately after it is submitted sending the message, and you may need a local buffer to, once you hand the message to the system, it's copied into local buffer and the sender continues. Synchronous communication on the other hand is where you block until the message has been received or even a reply is received, depending on the semantics of it. Okay? So you block until you get back a reply, or there are variants of it, or you block until you get some sort of an acknowledgement saying that the message was received. Okay? So that's whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, and you can put the two together. Whether it's persistent, transient, synchronous, asynchronous, you will get 4 quadrants, okay, of combinations, and there are actually 6 combinations because there are some multiple things you can do within each quadrant. Okay, we'll look at each one. Okay. The first combination is it's persistent and it's asynchronous. Okay. Persistent means message is stored. Asynchronous essentially means it's non-blocking. Okay. Here is a time chart of what essentially this example, which is, as I said, an email is a good example of this. Okay. So you essentially have the sender on the top, which is labeled A, receiver on the bottom, labeled B. This is time. Okay, this is basically what's happening. Anything that is dark essentially means that that entity is executing. If it's dotted, this essentially means it's not executing or not running. Okay, so you have A is running, and then A sends off a message. Okay, and then as you can see, A immediately continues execution. Okay, it's not blocking, it continues to execute, and the message is actually in transit. Okay, and then after an arbitrary period of time, so the other entity is not running here, okay, because it is asynchronous. Okay, you don't have to have both of them running. So the message will be stored for an arbitrary period of time, and eventually B starts running and takes delivery of the message. Okay. So number 1, it's persistent. Okay, so B does not have to be running and the message will be stored until it runs and takes delivery. Okay, just as you do in email. The sender sends off an email message at some arbitrary later time. When you actually log into your mail system, you will take delivery of the message. The system would have stored it. Your mail client does not have to be running when the sender sends you the message. Okay, that's not a requirement of email, for instance. Okay. And it's asynchronous, which means that the sender is not waiting for you to send a reply. Okay. When somebody sends an email, they don't sit and wait for the reply. They go off and do other things. Okay. Right. That's a very simple example of persistent asynchronous. This one is the persistent synchronous case. Okay. So because it's synchronous, sender is blocking. That's the only difference here. Okay. So what happens is A is running here, Okay, and then A sends off a message and you'll see that it blocks. That's denoted by the dotted line until an acknowledgement comes back. Acknowledgement essentially in this case might say that the message has reached the other end. Okay, and then A can continue. Okay, so it is blocked until it has received an acknowledgement, and because we are still saying it's persistent, okay, the message is going to be stored here. So the receiver is not running. Message is stored for the receiver, and B can wait and execute at some later time and take delivery of the message. Okay. So that's persistent synchronous. Any questions on this before we look at the other cases?
So what's an example of a system that has that?
Okay, so good question. What is an example of persistent synchronous? I'm going to turn that back. See if anybody has any thoughts on this. Any thoughts, ideas?
TCP is an example.
Okay, TCP is being proposed as an example. Yeah, true. TCP is that persistent? Will it store messages for arbitrary periods of time? Probably not. So TCP, any socket communication is not persistent, it's actually transient. Okay, so we cannot put TCP in as an example here. Any other thoughts? Okay, so we'll see that there are actual systems like MPI, which we studied last time, which provide you the semantics. Another sort of real world example that you can think of is certain instant messaging systems actually allow you to do this, like BlackBerry Messenger is an example. What you can do is you can send off what looks like a text message, okay? And you can wait until you get an acknowledgement. It will show you the status saying the message has been delivered, okay? But not read. Okay, there's a difference between saying it's delivered and read. Delivered just says that it has reached the other person's phone. Okay? When they actually look at the message, then you will get another acknowledgement saying it's read. So it's stored until you get an acknowledgement, and you can block to it until you get that delivery status message. Okay? Just as a crude example of persistent synchronous. Okay? Let's look at the other case. Okay, now we are going to switch to transient. And the first two were so we are transient asynchronous and transient synchronous. And this one is transient asynchronous. Okay, because now communication is asynchronous, messages will not be stored, which means that both entities have to be running. Otherwise, the message will be discarded. If the message reaches the other end and the entity, the receiver is not running, is discarded. So you will see that while communication takes place, essentially both entities have to run. So here is transient asynchronous communication. Okay, so A sends it off, okay, and because it's asynchronous, it's non-blocking. Okay, so it's not going to wait. Okay, message reaches the other end, and then B has to be running and has to take delivery of the message. Okay. UDP is an example here, okay, because in UDP you don't actually wait for an acknowledgement. You just send off a message and continue, and then if the other entity is not running or is crashed, then the message will be discarded. So you have to essentially have to be running at the other end. Okay. Now we'll look at transient synchronous, and we'll look at three different flavors of transient synchronous. Okay, so transient again means that messages are not stored. Synchronous essentially means you are going to block until you receive an acknowledgement. Okay? And depending on what the acknowledgement is telling you, okay, we'll see three flavors of transient synchronous. The first one is what we'll call receipt-based transient synchronous. Okay? So since it's synchronous, it's blocking. A runs, it sends off a message and it blocks. Okay, message reaches the other end and an acknowledgement comes back. Okay. So this acknowledgement in this case is basically all it is saying is that the message has been received at the other machine. Okay, that's called receipt-based. Message has been delivered. Right. Okay, in this case, since you get an acknowledgement, B has, you know that the machine it has received it has reached the other end, but you don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily tell you that the application has taken delivery of it. So application in this case can take delivery at a later time. Okay, so the acknowledgement is only telling you that it has reached the other end. And here is another example. Here are two more examples of what the acknowledgement tells you, and there are different things here. Okay. So the first one was receipt based. This one is delivery based. So the acknowledgement here comes back not only after the message has been received at the other end, but the application at the other end has actually taken control or taken delivery of the message. It is called delivery based. Okay? So request has been received, you still block until the other end runs and takes delivery of the message. Okay, asynchronous RPC is an example of this. Okay, the RPC basically has not only reached the OS, but the OS has given it to the application, and the application has started, has actually taken delivery of it. Okay, that's called delivery based. The third one is response based, transient synchronous. Here you basically send a request, okay, and you are going to wait until not only does it reach the other end, not only until the process has actually taken delivery, but it has processed it and sent back a reply. Okay. So basically you are going to block until you receive a reply, not just an acknowledgement that your message was received. Okay. RPCs fall into this category. You're just going to send off a RPC request, you have to wait for a response. Okay. So the response will include the events where the message was received, delivered, processed, and a reply was generated and sent back. Okay. So RPCs actually fall into the last category. So transient synchronous, there are three flavors: receipt based, delivery based, and response based. In each case, when the reply comes back or an acknowledgement comes back, it tells you different things. And depending on what you want, you can pick the right system. Okay. So I'm going to go back and show the MPI. Okay, there's a question here. Yes.
So can I say that TCP is receipt based in these scenarios?
TCP is receipt based.
Yeah.
Question is, can we say that TCP is receipt based? This one.
Yeah, so I'm asking that because although it can continue sending packets before receiving an ACK for that packet that was just sent, congestion window doesn't slide until we do receive an ACK for the first packet.
Okay. So let's look at, understand the question and try to understand how TCP behaves. Yeah, again, this is not a class in networking, but nevertheless, we'll try to address this question and understand where TCP falls. Okay, so first of all, there are two things here. Okay, when we talk about protocol, so we are actually talking about what the application sees. Okay. What the application sees may be different from what the transport level protocol sees, which are slightly different things. The protocol is executing in the kernel. The endpoint, the application is executing in user space. And the way TCP would typically work is you do a send. Okay. All that this send is actually going to do is deliver. That's a system call, right? So send, or you do a write to a socket descriptor that will copy your message to the local kernel buffer, right? And then that write will actually return. Okay. You are not. So as far as the application is concerned, it has simply done a write. It's not blocking to wait for a reply. Okay. Which is sort of this case where you basically did a send and all you have done is you basically assume that it's been copied to a local buffer and you will continue. Okay. So from an application standpoint, you are not waiting for an acknowledgement. Okay. But if you now look at it from a protocol standpoint, things are different. Okay. If you now make the endpoints TCP rather than the application, you will slightly see different semantics. From a protocol standpoint, TCP is actually going to send, okay, and it will actually continue sending additional packets, but it will buffer them and wait for acknowledgements to come back. Okay. If an acknowledgement doesn't come back, it is going to retransmit saying the message was lost or something has happened. Okay. But if an acknowledgement does come back, it will take the message that was buffered and says I don't need it anymore and throw it away. And this window, which is basically all the messages that are in transit, okay, that's what the window is depicting, is going to keep sliding. Okay. So in some sense you are waiting for an acknowledgement to come back, but TCP is not going to block until, so if the window size is set to 1, which means that I only have one outstanding message, then you will basically send a message, you will block until an acknowledgement come back, and you will not continue sending any additional messages. Okay. But if for concurrency, you may have to have larger window size, which allows multiple messages or packets to be in transit. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is there is no clean mapping of how TCP behaves on any one of these. From an application standpoint, it looks like this. From a protocol standpoint, it sort of looks like this when the window size is 1, but not quite if the window size is greater than 1. Okay? So you have to keep that in mind. Since here we are talking about the application, what does the application actually say? It's slightly different from the way protocols will be. Okay? Go ahead. Any other questions on this? Okay, so we have seen 6 combinations. Okay, so first 2 combinations were persistent, synchronous, asynchronous. And then we looked at transient. Okay, and in transient we basically looked at transient asynchronous, which was this case. And when we came to transient synchronous, we saw 3 flavors of it. And the 3 flavors were what is the acknowledgement telling. In one case that it's received at the other end, it's been delivered, or that it has been processed. Okay. So now I want to go back to this. So first of all, you should be clear where UDP and TCP and sockets fall. Okay, they are not persistent, they are transient. Okay. I already said UDP is asynchronous, which is non-blocking, and TCP is sort of one of those. Okay. But going back to the MPI calls that I shown you last time, you will see that there are multiple variants of send. Okay. In particular, there were these 3 flavors of send, which says send a message and wait for it until it's copied to remote buffer, send a message and wait until the receipt starts, which means it's delivered, and send a message and wait for a reply. Okay, so there are 3 flavors of send, and as you can imagine, they map onto sort of the receipt based, which is received at the other end. It's delivery based, which is delivered, and you reply. Okay, send receive is the equivalent to reply. And there are 3 variants of send. So depending on what you want, what semantics you want, you can actually pick the right version of send in NPM. Okay, so that is just to show you that these things actually have some semantics associated with it. Okay, so now we are going to focus a little bit of our attention on persistent communication, simply because RMIs, RPCs, all of the things that we have talked about so far essentially is transient. Okay, messages are not stored. The only example of where messages are stored that we have talked about is email. Okay, email is not a program, it's basically something that you do at the application level, but you wanted to build a distributed system using persistent communication, how would you do it? What systems, middlewares exist out there that allow you to implement this form of communication? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about this. And the class of system that provide you persistent communication are referred to as message queuing systems. Okay? So essentially the abstraction that you have is what is referred to as a persistent queue. Okay? So it's a queue of messages. So this is sort of a very basic abstraction. There's a sender S, there's a receiver R, okay? And there is an abstract queue here that is basically going to hold your messages. Sender sends messages, it sort of arrives in the queue. Okay? And since this is persistent, this is a disk queue, not a memory queue. With a memory queue, a machine reboots, all the messages will go. Okay? This is a queue that's stored on disk. Okay? So messages basically are stored on a queue on disk, and whenever the receiver runs, it's going to take delivery of that message. And since the queue is on disk, messages can be queued for arbitrary periods of time. Okay? And the assumption is that disk space is not a bottleneck or a constraint. We'll assume there's infinite disk space. So you can store the messages for arbitrary amounts of time. Okay? There is no time limit on when the receiver has to take delivery. Okay? Email gives you a similar abstraction. So long as your inbox is not full, the message will be stored there for days, hours, days, weeks. You can go back and check your message 3 weeks later. All messages that have arrived would still be on your queue. In this case, its inbox is implemented as your disk queue. Okay? Now, although there is a single abstract queue, in message queuing system, there are more than one. Just as we saw Pony Express, there are routers and relays, and each of them essentially has a persistent queue. So if you have a persistent queue for the next hop. Next hop doesn't have to be the destination. It could, messages could traverse a sequence of hops. Okay? So you have this notion of queuing system. I'll show you pictures in just a moment. Okay? So support for persistent asynchronous communication. So it is non-blocking. Okay, and it's persistent. Okay, you basically have storage for your queues. Okay, and as I already mentioned, this notion of email as an example application. There are many more that you can build once you have this abstraction. Okay, so you communicate by inserting messages in queue and taking messages from the queue. Okay, there is no guarantee that a message will ever be read. Okay, because messages can be queued for arbitrary amounts of time. Okay, so you can assume that it's a more loosely coupled communication. Yeah, so here is basically various scenarios that can occur. Queue is persistent, so the queue is always there. So one example is communication takes place when both the sender and receiver are actually executing. Okay. So messages are flowing through the queue. Okay. Here is an example where the sender is running, it inserts messages in the queue, receiver is not running. Okay. Receiver can come back at some later time as is shown here and start taking delivery. At that point there's no requirement the sender is running. Email maps into all of these cases. Okay. So when you send a message, you don't need the other entity to be active, your receiver to be active. And when the receiver is reading their messages, you don't have to be active either. Okay. And then here is a case where message has been sent, it's sitting in the queue and neither the sender and receiver are active at the current time. It's queued for arbitrary amount of time until you basically get this case where the receiver is running. Okay. That's this abstraction that I was just showing you. Now let's look at real message queuing system. Here's an abstract model of a message queuing system, okay, where you have basically a sender that's sending messages and there is a queue and the receiver. Okay, and then the queue is actually on disk. Here are the 4 messages, or not messages, abstract methods that you need for implementing a message queuing system. Okay, you can say put a message into the queue. You can do get to get a message from the queue. Okay. You can poll. Okay. The receiver can poll to see if the queue is empty or not. Okay. And you can have a notify, which basically says that when a message arrives, notify that I have a message. Okay. So you will basically get these 4 abstractions. So put, get, poll, notify. Okay. Using these 4 abstract calls, you can implement this message queuing system. So here is a more general architecture, okay, where we show not one queue, but there are in reality there are going to be many queues, okay, because there are routers along the path, okay, and then each router is going to implement a disk-based. Okay, keep in mind that when I say router, these are not network routers that do packet routing. Okay, these are application level routers that implement a message queuing system. In case of email, these would be sort of the mail agents that sit on mail servers that try to deliver messages. In case of message queuing system, these are MQS routers. Okay, these are application level routers, not TCP/IP IP routers. Okay. Yeah, so each of them will implement a queue and they will deliver this hop by hop. Okay. So if this message is flowing from R1 or R2 to the application, if R2 is not running, it's queued here. If R1 is not running, it's queued here. And if both of these are running, it gets delivered to the application and gets queued there. Okay. Okay, another entity that is also present in message queuing system is what is referred to as a message broker. And what message broker can do is it will basically allow you to transform a message, okay, do protocol translation or do some transformation that may be needed when you basically go, or it could also do what is called filtering. Okay, so you can only deliver selected messages. Okay. One large class of applications that use MQ message queuing systems is publish-subscribe systems. In publish-subscribe systems, what happens is the receiver can subscribe to certain types of messages. Okay. When those types of messages are actually inserted into the system, the broker will run, it will match a message against your subscription, and if there is a match, then that message will be delivered. Okay. If there is no match, then that message is assumed to be not of interest to the recipient. Okay. So you could, in the mail case, you could actually subscribe to a mailing list, for instance. Okay. And then if you are not on that mailing list, that message will not be delivered. If you are, then the message is delivered. So that's an example of filtering. A message is filtered against recipients on the list. Okay. There are other important things that this message brokers do, which is format conversion. Okay. If you have different protocol versions, it can do additional things like convert the message from one format to another, one protocol to another, which we don't have to worry about here, but those are some of the functions that these message brokers provide. Okay. Here's an actual example of a real message queuing system. This is IBM's WebSphere MQS message queuing system. Okay. This is a product or a middleware that you can buy, in this case from IBM. It has it's a fairly complicated system in terms of what it allows you to do. Okay. So there are queue managers that manage these queues. Okay. So there are channel agents that basically essentially route packets. Okay. So there are these 2 entities. So one is called a queue manager, and then the other one is basically a router. So in this case, is if when a message comes in, the queue manager essentially figures out what queue to put in, where to forward it, and so on. And the MCA is the message, the channel agent, which is actually going to try to deliver it to the next hop. Okay, so here you see a message actually going to 2 hops before it reaches the destination. So there are open source message queuing systems as well, several of them actually. There's one called RabbitMQ, and there are several others like that implement similar features. So you could think of, if you wanted to implement your own email system, you could implement it on top of a message queuing system if you wanted. Okay. Typically mail uses something called SMTP, okay, which is sort of a mail transfer protocol, and that itself is using its own custom MQS. It's not really built on top of a product, it has its own MQS built in. But you could in theory do this if you wanted to as well. Okay. Now the only thing I'll mention is hop by hop delivery is uses typical TCP/IP or RPCs. Okay. So when you want to send a message from this router to this router, you are going to set up either a TCP connection and hand that message, or in this case, because you can see stubs here, you can imagine that it's actually using RPCs to do hop by hop communication. But once a message is actually going to arrive at the other end, it is stored on disk and it becomes persistent. Okay. Questions here? Anybody actually encountered MQSs before? Microsoft also incidentally has its own MQS system. Many companies that build enterprise applications provide this as a middleware for implementing enterprise applications. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about.
So we've been assuming that queues are infinite and disk is not an issue. Is it still the same semantics if we say there's a limit on the number of messages?
Okay. Question is, it's a good question. So question is, we have assumed that disk is infinite and messages will be stored for arbitrary periods of time. Okay. Is it still the same semantics, or what semantics will you provide if queues are not infinite? So our assumption that queues are infinite is actually a simplification. In reality, you don't really have infinite disks. Right? You may have a 500 gigabyte disk that may be able to store 1 million messages, okay, or 10 million messages, but still a finite buffer. Okay? So typically what would happen is when you configure the system, you will have some policies which says for how long should the message be queued. Okay? I did say that like email is a good example, right? In email, when you send a message, if the mail server at the other end is not running, okay, it is going to queue that message for some period of time. But that queuing is not infinite. There is the mail administrator has put a policy saying store the message for at most 7 days and keep trying for 7 days. If the message cannot be delivered in 7 days, you will get a bounce back saying message could not be delivered. Okay, although there is no problem from a queuing perspective, I mean even a disk space perspective. So in reality, when you configure the system, queues are finite, but there are also policies on how long to keep the message. Right. Same is true of your inbox. Once your inbox fills up, your quota fills up, messages will start bouncing. Right. So I think the same would be true here, that you would have, but that is a administrator policy. The system administrator, when they use this for an application, can tweak saying what are the policies, what is the message expiration time if the machine is down, or what kind of quotas to put on these queues, because these queues could be used by many different applications. So you don't want some application to start hogging all the disk space. So you can say each application gets 500 megabytes of queue space. And if that spills up, then you'll get an error, and the person who wrote the application has to figure out what went wrong and try to fix it. Okay, so there will be, realistically, there will be policies that will not really assume infinite queuing and things like that in this case. Any other questions? Okay. So we are going to switch gears a little bit, okay, and talk now about a different form of communication, which is stream oriented. Okay, thus far, whether communication was persistent or transient, we assume message-oriented communication. You send a message gets to the other end. A message is delivered, or you take delivery of a message. A very different form of communication is stream-oriented. The simplest example of a stream-oriented communication is audio-video streaming. Okay? In audio-video streaming, you don't take the entire video file, which may be gigabytes in size, and send it as one message. Clearly, that's not going to work. You'll actually send it in smaller pieces, but you'll have to send it all continuously in time, periodically in time. So, message-oriented communication is request-response based. Okay, stream-oriented communication is different. Okay, you basically have to send a stream so in a periodic fashion. Okay, the important thing with stream-oriented communication is there are timing constraints, okay, that you have to deal with. Otherwise, user sees poor performance. Okay. If you are playing a video, let's say from YouTube, and the next day or sort of the frames or data doesn't arrive, your playback is going to freeze. Okay, then you'll see that the system is buffering or doing something, you don't quite understand what went wrong, but you do know that data was not received in time to playback. Okay? And you want to avoid, a good streaming system will try to avoid such problems or playback glitches. You want to make sure that data is flowing smoothly, and data is always there when you play it. If data arrives late, okay, you are going to get a playback freeze. Okay? There are no such constraints on message-oriented communication. When you send a message, you don't put a constraint that says that message better get there 3 seconds from now. A message is assumed to take an arbitrary period of time. If the message comes there a little late, there is no concept of late, first of all. If the message gets there, you say the message transmission was successful. Right? In stream-oriented communication, if data arrives late, it is essentially not of much use. Okay, because, no, I shouldn't say not of much use, it has already caused a problem. Okay, because the user has already seen a playback. Okay, so late data is just as bad as not getting the data at all. Okay. In message-oriented communication, not getting data is bad. Late is okay, it just seems to be slower than usual. But you will not say there's incorrectness treats it. Okay. So, in case of video, if you have HD quality or NTSC quality video, you have to send 30 or 60 frames a second. 60 images per second keep going through. Okay. That's a lot of data to send continuously. Okay. So, what that means is, from the receiver standpoint, you have to receive and display a frame, which is an image, every 33 milliseconds. Okay, there are 30 frames coming every second. Each frame is going to have a small difference with respect to the previous frame, and as you will see, motion, because some things in the frame are moving, okay, some objects are moving, and that's what is causing motion in the video and so on. Okay. So, important characteristics is isochronous. There are timeliness constraints. Okay, the network has to deliver data on time, or the user does not see satisfactory performance. Okay, it's an important difference between stream-oriented and message-oriented communication. Okay, so there are delay sort of bounds on the amount of time the message can actually take to propagate through the network. Otherwise, you see a playback glitch, okay, or you see jitter. Okay, the other important difference is that in many cases, not all, in many cases this is server push, not client pull. Okay. Once you say play on your player, whether it's YouTube or any other form of player you might have, okay, your client does insert, if you have a push mode, the client is not saying give me the next frame of the video. Okay. It doesn't keep on sending this request and reply comes back. The streaming server is just sending data, assuming that the client wants to play it, you just keep sending data. Okay, and then the data just comes over the network, and all that the client has to do is just keep listing on a socket and keep reading data, okay, and just playing it out. Okay, so it's a push based architecture. Okay, there are client pull based streaming systems as well, okay, which I will mention a little later, but in many cases these are push based. You just say play, or you say pause or stop, and those are the events that go back to the server and tell it what to do. In between, there may not be explicit request for more data from the client. Okay, so here are 2 or 3 different examples of using stream-based communication. Okay, so the thing I'll mention also is, depending on what type of data you are streaming, you have 2 classes. Okay, one is called stored video and audio, the other one is live. Okay, if you're doing Skype or any of these audio video chats, you are actually sending live data. The other case is the data is already there, it's to sitting on a disk somewhere, and so the server has to actually just read it from the disk and send it to you. YouTube is an example of stored video. Okay, the data has already been produced and stored on a server. Okay, when you do audio or video conferencing of any sort, whether it's Skype or Google Hangout or any other kind of streaming that you do, that's live video. So here you are basically showing a live where a camera is capturing the data, it's encoding it, converting it into a stream. The stream is going over a network, it reaches the other end, it decodes it and displays it. Okay. All of that has to happen in real time. The capture from the camera at one end, okay, encoding it, that's a raw capture, that's just an image. You have to encode it so it becomes a sort of a compressed form of some sort, whether it's H.264 or MPEG or all these formats that you have for streaming. You have to convert it into that form, then you have to send it over a network. It has to flow smoothly, reach at the other end within the delay bound and replay. Okay, so live or audio video conferencing has even more stringent constraints. Okay. If you see any delay, you will see problems because the person speaks, and if you are not actually, if the data doesn't get there in time, you will see a lag. Okay, you basically seem to think that there is a delay in when the person speaks and when you actually see it. Okay. Typically, from a human tolerance standpoint, people have done studies on this, and what they have found is you have 150 millisecond tolerance. Okay, when somebody speaks, okay, the data doesn't reach the other end in 150 milliseconds, you start perceiving a lag. Okay, same is true when you make international phone calls, right? Because the delay, there's speed of light delays, and you actually start seeing some lag because of the message, the audio package do take some time to get there. In case of when you're doing this over the internet, the lag can grow. If it's more than 150 milliseconds, you start seeing performance problems. In case of stored, this is not as stringent. You just need data to flow smoothly, but there is no such problem. So long as you keep streaming, that's okay. But live streaming has even more stringent constraints. Okay. So that's basically the case where you have one-to-one, as one sender, one receiver. Here we have basically one sender, multiple receivers. This is like a webcast. So you're sending it, but then there are many recipients. And typically this is done through what a mechanism called multicast that we'll also look at, or group communication. There are many receivers that have tuned into this one sender. Okay, and this one sender is transmitting, and the stream actually is received by a set of receivers. And what this is actually showing is, rather than sending n packets out, one to each recipient, you can be smarter and essentially construct a delivery tree, an overlay which says I send it to the root, and from the root it propagates until it reaches all the things. Okay, so you basically have a more efficient form of communication. We will come back to this as well. But these are just different forms of streaming. Okay, one is whether it's live or stored, or the other is whether it's one-to-one or one-to-many. The top one is one-to-one live, the bottom one is one-to-many. I didn't say whether that was live or stored, it could be either. Okay. So, important difference is that there is some notion of timeliness constraints, okay, which we will broadly say is this notion of quality of service. You want some service quality from a streaming system. Okay, if the streaming system is not able to meet that minimum service quality, you will have not very satisfactory performance. You'll see performance glitches or jerky playback or drops in your video and so on and so forth. Okay, so I should mention that an example of this multicast, if you are actually watching a live stream of a, let's say, sporting event, that is essentially this. It's being webcast live, and there may be tens of thousands of receivers who are all tuned into that live sporting event. Okay, as an example. Okay. So there is this notion of a quality of service, okay, which is, if you, and that is the acronym that is used is QoS, for quality of service. Okay, so if you hear this term QoS, this is what you should know. That you basically, the applications are demanding that the communication meet a certain level of quality. Okay, that can be dependent on what the application wants. And if the system, the network or the end systems is not able to provide that quality, it doesn't have the resources to provide it, okay, then your application sees unsatisfactory performance. Quality of service could be as simple as I need enough bandwidth to receive a 500 kilobits per second video stream. Yeah, so that's the most basic quality requirement. I need enough bandwidth to get this data through. Okay. Typically there is more than that. You have a bandwidth requirement, you have a delay requirement, saying that I need to ensure that the end-to-end delay does not keep varying and cause playback glitches. Okay. You may have a loss requirement, because if the data starts getting dropped, there's also a problem. Okay. Why is there a problem? Okay, so there may be a bandwidth.
You don't get it, right?
Okay. So point is, if you send a video, okay, let's say some packet gets lost, let's say one image of the video is lost. Okay, so now you have not received that image at the other end. Okay, so that's a problem. Now why could you not use TCP and retransmit? Okay, so you could say I will run this on TCP and let TCP retransmit. But as I said, late data is as bad as not getting data. So you could retransmit, but by that time you have already gone past the point where that data was supposed to be played out. So the data arrives late because it was resent again. That's equally bad. Okay? Unless you have buffering. We will see that you can actually retransmit, but if you have sufficient buffer at the client end, you still have time to receive resent packet, and I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. Okay, so there are some interesting optimizations you may have to do to ensure that data is. In fact, early streaming systems, because of this problem of TCP, where it was retransmitting and data was just getting that late, were built on UDP, not TCP. Okay, so you just said that if data is lost, you just skip. Don't worry about trying to retransmit because it may get there too late. You just skip that and continue the playback. There will be a small glitch, but that's okay. I mean, that's just a problem that the user sees. Okay. Now, modern systems actually use TCP, not necessarily UDP, although there are UDP systems as well. Okay. And I'll talk a little bit about this. Okay. So quality of service could mean I need enough bandwidth to send a video of a certain quality, whether it's HD quality or low bandwidth. So if you do YouTube, can actually set the playback quality. You can say HD, high quality, low quality, or even in some cases it shows you streaming rate. Or it asks you, are you on a dial-up, which people mostly are not today, but are you on dial-up or DSL or cable or Ethernet, and it will adjust the quality accordingly, estimates how much bandwidth you have. It will also estimate online what quality you are actually seeing. If you start seeing lots of packet losses or delays, it will drop, the systems will actually drop the quality for you. So you can see something rather than not getting anything and seeing playback glitches. So there are intelligent schemes that you use in streaming. And again, we'll come back to that. At the moment, let's just talk about quality of service. So here is a much more detailed description of all the various requirements that you may have on the quality that you want from the network. Okay, so you could say, I am going to basically have sensitive to loss, there is some end-to-end delay requirement, I may actually have some requirement on the jitter, which is the variance in the delay, not just the end-to-end delay, but the variance in the delay. I will basically require a certain amount of bandwidth. Okay, bandwidth could be actually a fixed bandwidth or it could be variable bandwidth, depending on how the video is encoded. Typically, if you know anything about audio or video, you will realize that there are actually two kinds of encoding schemes. One is called fixed rate encoding. Okay, that says that the data is encoded at a fixed rate. Okay, so if you have 64 kbps audio, for instance, the audio is encoded as 64 kilobits per second, regardless of what is in the data. Even silence, which is basically no data, is actually encoded as silent packet. Okay. Or you can have variable quality encoding, not variable quality, variable rate encoding. In variable rate encoding, depending on what is in the data, the amount of bits that you need to encode that data keeps fluctuating. If there is a lot of complexity or a lot of audio, okay, you will need more data to be sent. Okay, if there is silence, for instance, you don't have to send a lot of data. Right? So the amount of data you may send may fluctuate. Okay, so you could say that I send on an average at X kilobits per second, but the rate will vary and it has to have maximum of something and average of some other. Okay, so there are many ways to specify the quality of service. Okay, typically, in the old days, the way people envisioned what the network would do, okay, this is not done, but this is mostly historical account. The way they assumed that you are going to get quality of services before the server actually starts streaming, it would tell the network and the endpoint saying this is what the stream is going to need to be sent in a satisfactory way. Because end-to-end delay of X and bandwidth of Y and all of these, no more losses, only 1 in 1,000 packets can be lost, otherwise the quality will suffer. So you could specify this, and the assumption was the network will assume, take this request and actually reserve sufficient resources so you could send that data in a satisfactory way. So this required that the network actually had the capability to reserve resources for streams. Yeah, as you know, internet doesn't do that. I mean, all TCP/IP, you do best effort. You just send, and you just assume that the network will do its best to receive it. So this notion of quality being demanded of the network and network guaranteeing you that yes, the network has reserved sufficient resources to guarantee you that quality doesn't actually happen. But this is what people envisioned could be done. And because of the complexity in doing all of that and the objective of not trying to add complexity to the network, real networks don't do it. Okay? Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that this quality or QoS requirements are not needed. They are necessary, but the assumption is if you have enough resources, most of the time you will basically see good performance, and in some cases you may not. Okay? So today streaming is still done over best effort networks, not over networks that guarantee you anything. Okay? So I'm going to specify one more thing, which is this notion of a token bucket. Okay? So if you just distill your quality of service into one parameter. Okay, so here I specified maybe a dozen different parameters that capture the quality you need. But if you just had one to pick, you would pick bandwidth, saying I need to specify a bandwidth that I need from the network. Okay, I need the network to basically give me that bandwidth, and I want to ensure that data actually enters the network in a sort of in a way that conforms to the required bandwidth. So one mechanism that was developed to enforce this quality, specify and enforce this quality of service, was this notion of a token bucket, also referred to as a leaky bucket. Okay, so the idea is as follows. So this application is generating packets, okay, and we do say the application can generate packets in some arbitrary way. Okay, so there may be some spaced close to one another, and these two are spaced a little farther apart. But what the application has said is that it will inject packet at a certain rate. Okay, the rate is captured by parameter R. Okay, the rate could be I am going to send 500 kilobits per second. That's the rate at which I send. Okay. Now if you want to actually inject packet into the network at that rate, you use this mechanism called leaky bucket, which is called a policing mechanism. That says that no matter how the application is generating packet, it is going to guarantee you that the rate is actually going to be confirmed to not going to exceed R. That's the rate at which you said you would send your packets. How that is done, I'll mention. This is just what the mechanism does. Okay? And you are also allowed to specify a burst parameter B, which is once in a while you can actually send a burst of packets. But on an average, you basically have to send at a rate of R. Okay? So here is basically, so the token bucket mechanism has two parameters, okay? A rate R and a burst rate B. Okay, what this is basically also saying is at any point in time, the amount of data, okay, that you can send in time t is basically bounded by this equation. Okay, R time t plus the burst. And R is the rate at which you are sending. So in time t you would have sent R time t packet. Okay, but since you can also send a burst of packet, this is the maximum number of packets you could have sent in any time t. Okay, so if I were to draw a graph of time, okay, and this is the amount of data sent in packets. Okay, this is basically the equation R times t plus b. This is the intercept b, and the slope is R. Okay. So if you actually see what the token bucket is doing, is basically enforcing that the amount of data that you are sending is actually going to be bounded by that line. It will never let you cross that line, okay, because that is the rate at which you said you would send. You are not allowed to violate that rate. Now, how to do it? That's what the mechanism is. Okay, so here is basically the way it works. Okay, so what the token bucket does, okay, is when you start the system, you have this notion of tokens. okay, that you put in this bucket. Right. So when you start with a bucket filled with B tokens. Okay. And every time your application generates a packet, before you inject it into the system, that packet has to grab a token. Okay. Token is essentially a pass that tells that you can actually go enter the network. Okay. So packet 1 is generated, it will take the, since there are B tokens, it will basically take the first token and enter, and packet 2 is generated, it is going to take the second token and enter, and so on. And the bucket is actually replenished at the rate of R. Okay, you generate R new tokens every second and add it to that bucket. Right. The bucket can hold a maximum of B tokens. If the bucket is full, you can't add any more tokens to it. If the bucket is not full, then you're generating a token every once over R and you're adding it to the bucket. Okay, is that clear what I'm saying? I mean, there's not a real bucket in an operating system. You have to realize that. And this abstract notion. Okay, just to understand. Okay, so so the idea is basically you can have packets go out one with each token. If the bucket is empty and you generate a packet, then you have to wait until the next token is generated and then you get to go. Okay? Yes, question.
Would you actually wait or just throw it back to them?
No, in this case you would wait. Because you are policing, you are not dropping. Policing just says that I am just going to, if you generate faster than R, packets have to wait to enter. Okay, this is what's also called rate control. You are controlling the rate at which packets enter the network. Okay, so token bucket is a policing mechanism that allows you to enforce the rate of R. Okay. Yes.
So you mentioned that this token bucket notion or model was developed to specify bandwidth requirements, but it seems that instead of sort of providing quality of service guarantees, it's actually just limiting the way you send data.
Okay. So question is a good point. I haven't actually given the full picture. The question is as follows. The question is, I said that typically what you do is just specify the quality of service. In this case, you will say, my traffic looks like this. I'm going to generate packets at the rate R, but I also want to have ability to burst once in a while, and the maximum burst size I'm going to send is B. Okay? You specify this to the network. And typically, if the network says it has actually reserved enough resources to meet that requirement, then the application has to do its part, which is not violate what it said it would do. Right? Token bucket is the other, is the mechanism that ensures that if the network has sort of reserved enough resources, the OS is making sure that the application also meets its specified QoS. It's not going to send at a rate greater than R. Because if it sends at a rate greater than R, whatever you have reserved makes no sense, right? Because you exceeded the resources needed to specify. So this is a policing mechanism. This allows you to control the rate. It is used for many other reasons. Okay? If you want to limit the amount of data that any application wants to consume on your system, even though the network may have done nothing, if you want to just limit the rate, this is a way to do it. Okay? There are OS mechanisms. If you actually look at Linux and other operating systems, they allow you to cap the rate any application can take. Okay, so no one application can hog the entire network interface bandwidth. So the way you can do that is you can attach a token bucket to that socket descriptor. Okay, and that will ensure that if the packet application tries to send more than its rate, then it will be held back. The packet will be actually held back before it goes in. Okay. So token buckets are used for many different reasons. Okay, so today, because the network doesn't guarantee you anything, the only way to do this is to do rate limiting or rate control. Now let's come back to yes.
I would think it would probably be, for example, I mean, I see this as sort of smoothing out your output. Couldn't you sort of, it would sort of be more natural to sort of, push as much data as you can out at one time, and then at the receiving end, you sort of implement something like this, so you have a smooth output at the receiver's end.
Okay. So another point being made is that this is a way of smoothing the way, the amount of data you inject into the network. Why not just send in a bursty way, and then just have something at the other end which delivers at a smooth rate. Okay? I'll talk about what is happening at the other end in just a moment. So you don't do token bucket, but you still have to deliver at the rate at which the application is expecting data. This is just enforcing. But I want everyone to understand how this works. Okay, so let's say So why is this guaranteeing average rate of R? Okay, let's ask that question. So let's assume that you start with a bucket of B tokens. Okay. So long as if you have your tokens in the bucket, you can send. Okay. So in the worst case, what you would send is the application would immediately generate a burst of B. It would generate B packets all at once at time 0. Okay. All these packets can immediately enter the network. Each one will grab a token and it will enter the network. So you send a token, a burst of B packets. Okay. At this point, the bucket will be empty. Okay. Once the bucket empties, if you start generating more packets, those packets have to wait. In particular, each packet will have to wait for time 1 over R until the next token is generated, because you are replenishing the bucket at a rate of R. R new tokens are being generated. Okay. So in this case scenario that I just mentioned, okay, you basically send a burst of B at time 0, and if you do that, and from that point on the bucket is going to be empty, and you are basically going to generate one token, and you are essentially sending at a rate of R, because that's the rate at which you are generating token. Okay. So you are bounded by that value. Now you don't have to generate a burst at time 0, you can generate it whenever you want. So in reality what may happen is basically you may just start sending at a rate of R, you may burst a little, okay, then the bucket will basically not be full anymore, and then you will send, you can slow down the sending, but whatever you do, you will basically not go over that line that the token bucket is enforced. It says that at any time you are going to be sending, the number of packets you have sent is less than or equal to this over any period T. Okay? It's just a way to control the rate at which you are sending, or the way to basically limit the rate or assign a quota to an application, saying this is what you can send at and no more. And token bucket is an OS level mechanism that is implemented in the protocol stack. Essentially, you can attach that to an application or to a socket endpoint and enforce the rate. Okay, and you will then the OS will guarantee that the OS or the application can never send more than that. Okay. So two parameters, rate parameter, burst parameter, and it's basically saying that that's the rate at which you send. Okay, now we'll come back to what's happening at the other end and so on. Okay, so I already said everything I wanted to say there. So here is an example of what might be happening at the other end. Okay, so we have injected packet at this rate. Packets arrive at the other end and they have to be received and played out, because they are sending stream communication. So typically the way streaming works is, here is the way packets are departing at the source. When they go through the network, because each router is queuing them up and delivering to the next router, there will be some jitter. Okay, packets are not going to arrive at a smooth way. There will be packet 1 may arrive, then maybe a little more time, packet 2 arrives, 3, 4, 5 may arrive one after another, and 6 and so on. So what is actually being shown in the second row here is the rate, the way packets are actually arriving at the end point. And the assumption is network is imposing variable delay on the amount end-to-end transmission time. Okay, so some packets get there a little faster than other packets. Okay. Now if you start playing out your video as soon as the first packet arrives, you will actually see trouble, because if you play the first packet out, you assume if it's video at 30 frames a second, you expect the next frame to arrive 33 milliseconds later. Right? In this case, the time between frames is variable, because the network is doing arbitrary things to the packet. They may take different routes, they might get queued, some may get queued up for longer than others, and so on. Okay? So typically what you do is you don't actually start playing out as soon as the first bytes are received. What you do is at the other endpoint you will have a buffer. Okay? You will buffer some number of frames. Okay, only then will you start playing out. Okay, and the idea is, if you have this buffer, then if some packets arrive faster and some arrive slower, you still have enough data to keep playing. And so long as you don't have a buffer underflow, which is you empty the buffer, you will have enough data to play all the time. Okay, in this case, what we have shown is we basically start playing out after the first 6 packets. So your buffer size in this case is 6. You wait for 6 frames to show up, and then you start playing. And once you play, you have to play at a certain rate. That's the frame rate of the video. In this case, you're playing, let's say, 30 frames a second, so you actually need 30 of those to arrive. So see what happens. So you buffered 6, then you started playing. Okay? The 7th packet actually came. By that time, you already played out the first 4. Okay, your buffer only has now 2 packets, and then this one has arrived. Okay, the buffer has shrunk from 6 to 3, okay, because data is not arriving at the same rate here. So you keep playing, okay, and then at this point you played out all the 7, and then the 8th one has yet not yet come because there is a long gap between these 2 packets. Here the buffer is empty, okay, and you will see a playback glitch. Okay, this is where you will see a message saying rebuffering and so on. So this player will halt. It will wait for the buffer to fill up again before it starts playing. So what this is showing is for this arrival pattern, 6 packets was simply not enough. You should have buffered for more because there are long delays between some packets like here and short delays between other. And the point is you want enough buffered at the other end so that your buffer never empties. Okay. Now how to guess how much to buffer is also dependent on the player. The network is not going to say it. This is the way packets are going to be delivered. It's the best effort. Right? So typically you will have rules of thumb which say let's assume that we'll buffer 10 seconds worth of data before we start playing. I'm just making up a number 10. I'm not saying that's what is used. Okay, then if that is not enough, then the player will die. If you see a playback glitch, it will increase the size of the buffer, saying that wasn't enough. So now I'm going to wait until 15 seconds of data is buffered before I start playing. The only problem is the larger you make the buffer, the more the user has to wait. Okay, if you basically say the buffer is 10, by definition the user will have to wait at least 10 seconds before playback starts. Okay, so you don't want very large buffers because user gets impatient. You say I'm going to wait until 5 minutes are buffered. Think about it. If YouTube says wait 5 minutes before your playback starts, people will get impatient. Okay, in fact, there are studies that said few seconds of a glitch, you basically get say system is not working, I'm going to just do something else and just stop. So you want the buffer small enough so that users don't get impatient, but you want it large enough so that you don't have playback glitches. And that's not an easy thing to deal with. So sometimes you start with a small buffer in the optimistic assumption that the network is doing good, providing good quality. And if there's a playback glitch, only then you increase the buffer size. Okay? So this is what is done at the client, where you basically have a buffer before you start playing out. That causes a playback glitch. And typically you want to have the buffer large enough so that you have a smooth playback, but don't want to make it too large to cause problems of making users wait for their play. Okay, so most players at the other end will actually do this. Okay? Senders may do token bucket or may not do anything at all. So now we'll come back to this notion of what happens if there are lost packets. Okay, so here is a simple scenario. There are 2 different cases, A and B. Okay, in the top case, what we have shown is that there are frames that are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 16. And in this is somewhat simple case scenario where it says each packet can hold 4 frames. But typically a packet cannot even hold a single frame. A frame is bigger than the size of a packet. But for simplicity, I've just shown a case where we have very tiny frames or audio samples and each packet can store 4 of them. Okay? So you basically send them in order and we assume that the 3rd packet gets lost. So from a client standpoint, you basically play the first 8 frames and then there is a gap of 4 and then the playback resumes from 13. Okay, so there is a glitch and you'll see that there is basically video will freeze and when it resumes, it won't necessarily resume where it left off. It will resume from a later point, so you missed a little bit of the video, okay, because that video will disappear. Okay, so rather than do this, what some schemes do is they scramble. Okay, they say that if one packet is lost, there is a concentrated loss at that point in time, why not spread the losses? Okay, so here's another way to send. So you don't send in order, you scramble. You take the first 16 frames and you scramble them. First packet you send 1, 5, 9, 30. That's the first frame in each of those original packets. And the next one is 2, 6, 10, 14, 3, 7, 11, 15 and so on. So now if this same 3rd packets get lost, what you have lost is frame number 3, 7, 11 and 15. If you look at what you have actually lost in the original video, you lost the 3rd day frame here, the 7th frame, 11th frame and the 15th frame. And the assumption is from a playback quality standpoint, although you lost the same amount of data, which is 4 frames, by spreading that losses around, okay, user sees better performance. Okay? So the other way to think about it is tiny glitches are less perceptible than one large glitch. Okay, if you are playing, let's think about it. If you are playing 30 images per second, the next second you played only 29, okay, rather than 30, because one frame was lost, it is not even going to be perceptible to you in reality, because that one frame, when you are playing 30, your human eye cannot actually distinguish between 30 frames and 29 frames. Okay? But if you lose a group of frames, you can actually perceive that. Okay, so this is just a way by which you say, if you spread the losses and cause smaller glitches, that is less of a performance impact, although you have lost the same amount of data. Okay, so some schemes will scramble the order and spread the data around, and spread the losses around. If one packet gets lost, it kind of distributes the losses. Yes?
This assumes though that your buffer is smart enough to reorder
Yes.
edges.
This does assume that you are smart enough to reorder, packets are numbered. This also increases the buffering time. What you will realize is you cannot play out until you actually received all 16, because the fourth frame is actually received in the fourth packet. Okay, here, if my buffer size was 4, as soon as the first packet is received, I can stay playing. Okay, so this increases the buffering delay. It also assumes that you can reorder, but that's not a problem, because frames are numbered. So the receiver knows what frame needs to be played out with. But the bigger issue here is that the buffering requirement increases, because some data has come much later, and then you have to reorder it and play it out in the right order. You can't play it in the order in which it came. Okay, that's a scrambled order. It makes no sense from the to the user. You have to reconstruct the order and play it out in the right order. Okay, the one last point I'll mention, which we will not go into much detail, is so all of these assume that once data is lost, there is no time to retransmit. Okay. So one way to have recovered that is you have something like TCP which retransmits, so these lost packets actually come back to you. So we assume there is no time to do that. Only if the buffering requirements, if you have buffered quite a bit, can you actually retransmit, so data has actually been resent and there is enough time to resend before it's played out. Okay, so for that you need much larger buffers. So we assume no way to retransmit. Then the only thing you can do is to recover any lost information, you can use what is called forward error correction. What forward error correction or FEC does is it sends redundant data, so you can reconstruct. You think of, in the worst case, you will send each packet twice. Okay, so that's basically the absolute worst scenario in terms of I double the bandwidth. Each packet is sent twice, so the probably, and you need to receive one of those two copies of the packet on time, and then you are done. So if this packet was lost, maybe its other copy that was also resent at the same time would show up. Okay. Now that is going to clearly double the requirement. So there are better coding schemes like FECs which will allow you to add redundancy without necessarily doubling your requirement. We won't go into coding schemes here, but there are things that you can do that are a lot more efficient that don't necessarily increase it by a factor of 2. Okay. But so you can send some redundant information that will allow you to reconstruct without retransmitting. Just sending 2 copies is a way to reconstruct. If this doesn't come, the backup copy comes and you get the data. But there are other techniques that are more efficient. So all of these are actually used in some shape or form. You can use some redundancy, you can do some scrambling, you can do some buffering. Okay, so there are tricks we play at the client end, all to meet this quality of service. Because late data is something that you cannot deal with. Lost packets, you cannot wait until you retransmit and so on. Okay, so we are going to end here. We have sort of run out of time. Couple more things to say here, which I will say, sort of come back to next time. Okay, so for today, this is it. There is a lab out. I mentioned this. If you haven't actually seen it, please do go look at it. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the lab, but there's no time today. So I'll do it at the beginning of the class on Wednesday. Okay? Your goal is to go read it and get started on it. If you have questions, please send us email, post on Piazza, or come with questions to class next time. Okay?